making work together, understanding methodologies together, and so on. So in Goa Familia, I'd like to mention that I work along with my co-curator, Akshay Mahajan, and we have a team of researchers also consisting of Manashri Pai Dukle and Nishant Saldana, among others, for the Sandooka Museum project, which is a project commissioned by the India Foundation for the Arts. I work along with the Switch Studio, which is Upasana Natoji Roy and Saurabh Roy, along with Nitin Kushalappa, who's a researcher and writer, and Nitya Devaya, Dhriti Deliappa, and Christina Dedia, who are working with us. So with that as a start, before I share my screen, I'd like to say that everything that I have learned has been on ground. I probably don't have bookish knowledge about oral history so much as what I've simply learned when I'm out there in the field. So that is what I'm going to share today. So Gunjan, with your permission, I will share screen now.
Yes, please.
Yeah, so basically stories untold. The whole notion of the telling is what is complex in this place, because these stories often remain untold because they are connected with people who hold this knowledge, and very often they are personal perspectives. They're coming from an individual stance, they're coming from the orientation of a family or a community practice. And what happens with such knowledge is that very often, with the disappearance of the people themselves, the knowledge also disappears. When we move towards this idea of oral history being, being complex spaces, I'd like to share a few things about how we have gone about collecting these stories in both these projects.
Yes, we can see the screen now.
So, talking about Goa Familia. So this is a project that, in fact, was begun by, initiated by the Serendipity Arts Foundation in collaboration with Rahab Alana of Al-Qazi Foundation. And it was Akshay Mahajan and I who began with developing a methodology for the project. It was about gathering material from families in Goa, personal archives that consisted of photography, family albums, of course, and their narrative history, the stories that they told us. So with this in place, we began the project, and we were able to, in fact, talk to almost around, over 20 families so far. The project started in 2019, and it continues until now. We have also hosted a couple of exhibitions, one in 2019, and then we went online for the couple of years that was during the pandemic, when in fact people began to realize more and more the importance of documenting past histories and sharing them online. And then recently we held an exhibition again for the Serendipity Art Festival, which was called Families Are Like Rivers. The interesting part about this entire engagement is that the storytelling is often extremely non-linear. Here we have a very interesting space of, working with memory. And memory has its own very interesting connection with history. Now, memory is something that includes both presence and absence. It includes recollecting things very clearly, but it also includes forgetting. And these are the kinds of things that have come up over and over again for Akshay and I when we have been talking to people. Here we have, in fact, Clarice Vaz from Saligaon, whose project, whose massive project and book Romalina is something that we presented as part of the exhibition. So we have worked, in fact, very systematically documenting interviews with various families, and mostly these are dialogues with persons who are, sometimes quite aged, and sometimes we have also realized that the way they remember things and what they imagine is something that sometimes, sort of overlaps with each other. While we have maintained a stance of objectivity, we do, of course, have to check certain things like dates of events that happened in very important spaces, so that we can correlate it when we are producing text. And these are some things that we have to work with, considering that oral histories are something that are, completely coming from a very personal space. Of course, all this material that we gather is substantiated by photographs, and we digitize the photographs and then return the physical material back to the families who have shared it, along with specific permissions as to how and where and for what they are going to be made public. At this point, I would like to again, stop sharing and request Gunjan to share this small video, which will give you a sort of overview of the way we worked with different families. Gunjan, I'm not sure about the sound.
Can you hear it now?
Into perspective that otherwise remains. It is a multi-layered project by
Yeah, we can hear it now.
very nature. As family lives interpret and reflect social, political, economic, religious, and other cultural influence. The people in the pictures have lived through diverse developments and fluctuations at different points of time. Photography, in the context of this project, is seen as an intrinsic tool of documentation and visual archiving, representing social transition and the ever expanding possibilities of its own technical advancement over the decades. Akshay Mahajan and I have been working on the project since August 2019. We made contact with around 18 to 20 families, but 11 were actually featured in the work in progress exhibition that we set up for the Serendipity Arts Festival in December 2019. The exhibition came together organically, with families generously contributing original framed photographs, books, journals, and even objects and other memorabilia belonging to their ancestors. There is a sense of power and also a sense of vulnerability to be part of an initiative like Goa Familia. On the one hand, you are walking a fine line as you enter into someone's private space and their memory, looking through personal albums where emotions are laid bare and there is, in fact, no turning back. On the other hand, becoming a privileged holder of such stories and having the ability then to share it and safeguard it for posterity is both powerful and rewarding. In many ways, this project is about memory and its various forms and manifestations, which spring from both the personal and the collective experiences of people.
Thanks. Thank you, Gunjan. So I'll go back to my screen share now. And I hope it comes on correctly.
And we can see your screen.
So, as mentioned, we in fact developed communication with a large number of families, and we were able to have conversations with people. We were able to document their stories, and we were able to, in fact, make videos as well as audio collections with what they were able to share with us. So here, in fact, we have Marius Fernandez, whose mother Antonetta shared with us her wonderful story of moving between 3 different continents. Here, I would really like to talk about how memory plays a very important part. Perhaps she doesn't remember so well things that happened very recently, but she can remember in great detail things that happened 50 and 60 years ago. Here we have the Barreto brothers, and in fact, we have lost one of them in the recent past, but they shared with us a very, very beautiful story of their father, Dr. C. Barreto, who was in fact the personal dentist to Gandhiji himself. The beauty of these sorts of interactions is that when we are sitting there in their spaces and talking to them and understanding the little anecdotes that come into the entire discussion, it builds an entire world of information that you cannot receive, cannot get in a book or a newspaper or anything printed. It is their voices. It is them talking about generations of understanding of a family history, of memory, of their experiences. So that is the sort of thing that we have really learned to treasure. Here is Sheikh Jamal Anwar, and here on the right is photographs which are set out on the table by Mr. Sanjay Bharne. What we did try to do while gathering this documentation and these oral histories is that we tried to go as diverse as possible in the demography that is existing in Goa. Which means that we have spoken to Catholic families, we have spoken to Muslim families, we have spoken to Hindu families. We have understood also the beautiful secular understanding that exists, let's say, in a space like Panjim, which has all these businesses that are laid out along a street. We have been limited, of course, in terms of photography's own limitations, because over the 150 years that photography has, of course, existed in the subcontinent, and a large amount of that time has been, has given access of photography only to those who are more wealthy, which means there is definitely a class divide that we understand when we are documenting through the lens of photography itself. So when people ask us that, do you have documentation of this community or that tribal community, the question always comes up about the access to photography as cameras or studios, which is something of a limitation in our own documentation. We've had wonderful open calls through Goa Familia. So a large part of the documentation that we do in terms of videos, audio documentation, as well as written texts, we publish them on the website. But we also have lots of contributions that people are constantly sending us that go on to our Instagram page. And these stories keep alive the constant discussion of people sharing their histories and their memories. Even if they have one photograph, sometimes they have an absolutely interesting story, and that is what we like to put together. We have also been able to engage to a large extent with the public through outreach programs, opening up the dialogue of what oral histories are How do you archive? How do you tell your family story? What is this connection between what is private and what becomes public? Those are sensitive spaces that we have had to navigate and discuss about and understand before presenting projects like these. We have also understood that practitioners can engage with the material that we have and develop new modes of looking at it, like fiction, like Kamna Patel. She did a beautiful zine making workshop with participants, understanding as a basis the oral histories that we put together in our exhibition. We have in fact encountered continuously a large number of interconnected storylines that exist in places that we don't even realize. So for instance, in our recent exhibition, a couple from Ahmedabad, they walked in and they looked along the walls, and then suddenly the woman said, "But that's my father. How do you have his image over here?" And then it came down to it after a conversation that it was their daughter who had sent in some material about a restaurant they were connected with, which opened up an entire discussion of Goans in Gujarat and so on and so forth. So here we have from our previous exhibition, Mrs. Rao, who came in and recognized the pictures of her teacher, Pandit Govindchari, which is why we took this picture of her with the tablas that she said she sometimes practiced with. And then from Sanjay Bharne's collection, we found an image of Pandit Chari teaching a young Bharne to play the tabla. So these are the small and beautiful interconnections that constantly keep popping up in a project like Goa Familia. And we record them, we talk about them, and we always keep in mind, of course, the elements that the family would like to share and elements that they may not feel comfortable to share. It's a beautiful navigation in this space. I think Mr. Lewis is here with us today, so I'm so happy to be sharing this. He has played an important role in expanding our network and in fact allowing us into some beautiful stories about the history of Panjim and the history of Goans. Here, what we are trying to do is also not only build the archive ourselves, but to invite people who are also working within the field, who are documenters and gatherers of oral history themselves. So we have Vince Costa, who gave us connections to a number of people who shared images and memories and stories of the carnival and its evolution over the years. We have here Asavri Kulkarni, who gave us an extremely beautiful body of material that was in fact developed by her father, who accidentally purchased a camera and then began to document the fisherman's life. And this is something really rare because, as I mentioned before, it's very difficult to, for certain communities to have been documenting themselves because of the lack of access. But here we have a wonderful documentation because he had a camera that he somehow, had in his hands because his brother was working in the customs department. So all these little things become part of the oral histories that we gather. We've had some very interesting dialogues also that have come into the public realm. We've had some wonderful conversations with people, also interactions with others who are in the same space of documenting oral history. So I think that at the current moment, it has become a very, very important space, oral history. It has, of course, existed forever, but we do understand very clearly that history that is documented or written history is in itself not devoid of biases. It is ultimately someone's perspective. It is a community's perspective or a region's perspective, a nation's perspective, and politics does enter into the entire thing. The politics of representation is something that we have discussed at length. The matter of being insider and outsider is something that, of course, comes up every now and then, and something that we are deeply aware of, and that we definitely look at it, and we definitely deal with it on an everyday basis. Here I can say, so both with the project Goa Familia as well as Sandooka. It is true, and it's very practical as well. If you do not know a language, then how do you understand the nuances of a culture? When you are in a particular space and, you cannot make assumptions about your knowledge as an art historian. It doesn't work. It is absolutely coming from the inside out. So these questions are always there, but it doesn't prevent us from being part of these broader pictures of understanding what oral histories do to to understanding human development itself. It's not, it ceases to be connected with small things like you and me or what language we speak. It becomes part of the larger picture, and this is something that I have also gathered and understood in these interactions. There are discrepancies, there are new definitions to be made. Sometimes people are wary of us because of the exploitation that they might have undergone because of something else. In terms of photography, in terms of documenting song, dance, and other things, people do question about what are you going to use it for? Is it going to be sold? Is it going to become, part of a online course that someone else is making money on? All those things come into the picture. And of course, centrally, the idea of memory and its connection with history is something that we constantly deal with. Coming now to Sandooka, the Living Museum of Kodava Culture. This is a project that is it's almost complete, but it is not launched yet, which is why I will only be sharing a very few, images of developmental pictures of production, of us working together. It is a project that was commissioned by the IFA, as I mentioned, and it has as supporters Resero as well as Anurag, an NGO working in Court. We have a body of advisors who have given us guidelines as to how and in what way certain categories of stories are to be presented. This is the landing page. I hope that you all will look forward to when the project launches. We have a lot of beautiful material here. The studies that we have done are under these 9 categories as of now, which include, architecture, cuisine, art and craft, landscape, clothes and jewelry, and community histories, and so on. And we have worked with the community closely, inviting people to send us stories, to share photographs, to share their documentation, which comes in many, many different forms, because, as we know, everyone has a mobile device now that can be used for some sort of documentation, but everything is not fit to be reproduced as is. So we have had to work with a lot of material, understand methods and systems within which to place them. Also understand the fact that oral histories themselves can be diverse. So the story of a ritual practice in the north of Coorg may not be the same as the south of Coorg, which is the same here in Goa as well. Mythology changes, and therefore memories of rituals and customs or festivals and other practices change accordingly. So this is not one story. This is a multiplicity or a plurality of stories that have come together. This is by no means a comprehensive understanding of Kodava culture. This is a beginning. And this is what we are saying, that this is the beginning. We have used a very beautiful and interactive web interface that will allow people to intuitively interact with the different bodies of material. We have also worked on producing a set of interlinked tags so that each story doesn't stand on its own, but it is connected with the diversity of cultural material that we are sharing across the site. So here also there have been great joys and challenges. The one thing I can say is with a lot of cultural material that is connected to anthropology, connected to living traditions, when you are there on ground and when you are in their midst, there is a completely different understanding of it than if you're looking at it on a screen or reading about it in a book. And that's the beauty of oral cultures. We are listening to them singing their songs. They are explaining it to us as we are there. We are welcomed in some spaces we are not welcomed. It is also a system that we have learned to respect. Like, for instance, women are not allowed in certain sacred spaces, or certain acts of sacred nature, like a tere, are not supposed to be documented in their entirety because there are spiritual elements which are involved in it. They tell the stories, of course, but ultimately, as mediators and as people who are gathering these and making them public, there is a certain amount of filtration that we ourselves have to set in place. Because that's when we are able to archive, document, but also respect the private spaces that these histories belong to. Of course, we are in a very privileged position to be able to document all this material, to be able to say that we have been part of these dialogues that will remain, hopefully, for posterity. Because digital technology gives us the power, gives us the space, gives us the tools to be able to document things in a way that perhaps could not be done 10 or 20 years ago. So we have, objects in collections, each of which have their own story. And we are able to now use, new technology to make 360-degree illusions of the object in space, which can then give a complete experience to anybody who is viewing it rather than a flat image. We are able to go to spaces and document voices of people who perhaps may not be there with us for very long. And these are very, very special elements that we are able to bring in through the documentation of oral histories. It is also a conflicting space because there are hierarchies that are present in any community, and there are certain frameworks that people are dependent on in their in their systems and in their everyday lives. So we also have to respect the fact that there are people who are authorities perhaps on the culture, and their voices also must be made present in anything that we do. But culture is not for a single person or for a small group of people. Culture is meant for everyone. And I think that what we are trying to do with this project also is build in this multiplicity of voices, that culture is something that belongs to everyone, and everyone is, it is possible for everyone to express it in their own ways. So we have had, some beautiful publicity as well, discussing what the project is doing, what we are hoping to do in the future, and opening it up to dialogue, inviting people to send in their stories of this very, very special community that is, not so very well known across the length and breadth of India. And this is not the only one. There are many, many communities that exist across the length and breadth of India. And if this can be a model or some sort of template by which other people can also develop this sort of engagement with oral histories, then we have been able to do our job. We were really happy to have a lot of people opening their cupboards and their sandookas and their precious collections and sharing it with us and inviting us to come and document work, their collections in different ways. This is the Pattole Palame. It is a compilation of folk songs and traditions that was in fact translated by Boviri and Chinnappa, Nanjama and Chinnappa. And this, in fact, is the original book that we were able to document, a book that was copied out in handwriting by Bacharani and Annaya. And these are the kinds of things that have made our exchange with so many people so precious. And even as we work now in concluding the final design elements of the site, the discussions keep coming back. People are still sending us messages and information and pictures. And sometimes we have a surfeit of it, which we cannot even use anymore, but we have to hand it over to the archive that hopefully will be able to include it in the near future. Shri Napanda here is someone from whom it was so beautiful to learn the very aspects of tying the chele. The kupya chele, which is the traditional costume for men, for Kodava men. Now it comes in a very beautiful Velcro system. So the original tying of a turban or the original tying of a chele is really not necessary anymore. Time is short. Everyone has to do things very quickly. So even time for oral histories is something that doesn't exist. I know Heta is here, and reading her books is so inspiring because it takes that much of time to sit down, to engage, to document, to talk, to sift through, to put together these stories. It cannot be done in a click of a finger. Oral histories are something that happen only with time and engagement, and it's not a single time engagement, it's sustained engagement. One has to return to a place over and over and over again, so the atmosphere and the voices seep into you, and then it begins to make sense. So these are the kinds of things that perhaps will not exist very soon with the way things are changing, with the way developments are happening, urbanization, environmental changes, migration, mixed marriages. Everything is changing the very fabric of culture as we speak. But the beauty of projects like this is that when they are opened up to a vast community and the community is able to share their stories, all that becomes part of this vast data that we are then able to put together in some form and keep them for future generations as well to interact with. So with that, I close this part of the presentation, and I will open it up now to any kinds of comments, questions, or other sharing that the audience would like. Please do raise a hand or even put your question into the chat box if you'd like, or if you need some clarity on anything. No, would you supervise PhD candidates? No, I'm afraid that I am not associated with any institution. I'm an independent practitioner, so I'd be happy to have conversations, but I'm not in a position to be a guide. Thank you. Thank you, Heta, for the question. How do we encourage people to collect and display family memorabilia? I think that from what we have learned is that when we put out an open call and we encourage people to go and talk to their grandparents or the people in their family, or open their cupboards, or check if they have elements like this or objects like this in their homes, it works to a large extent because those questions trigger this sort of investigation into what they have themselves. Because for us here in India, really every home is like a mini museum. If you look in the kitchens, if you look in the showcases as we call them, or if you look at these embroideries or textiles, everything is a piece of history that has come over the generation. So we have realized from Goa Familia that when people visit the exhibition also, they become very interested in sharing what they have at home. So that has been the sort of forward progress for us. People who have visited the exhibition have then taken our number and called us and said, can you come and have a look at our material? We also have something like this. Oh, I also have old pictures of that. So at least it prevents the material from going into a dustbin or some other space, being dumped somewhere. But in many cases, because younger generations now, I have to say, are quite keen on history. And on the whole, they're participating hugely in the documentation of their own and others' history. But I think there is an entire generation who lost interest in actually maintaining family archives. And we have come across many cases in which entire bodies of material have just been discarded because they have no value or no value to the people who had them. So I think the only way is to keep pushing it out and also let an entire range of the younger generation speak for us on social media. So here there's a question from Riddhima, how can one become part of projects like these? There are several beautiful projects if you are located in Goa, Ms. Riddhima. There are several beautiful projects that are happening right here. And what you should do is just stay in touch with the Museum of Christian Art, or take you can take my details from the museum and you can be in touch. I can tell you about certain projects that would be accessible to you and would welcome volunteers, would welcome people to engage with heritage and be part of conservation efforts that are continuous. Thank you, Alka, for your comment. So Aruna Prabhu says here, what would be the connecting factors between documented heritage culture and modern social communities? Would you like to unmute yourself and maybe explain that, please?
Hello, this is Aruna here.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Lina, for your presentation. You mentioned that oral histories do a lot for human development, right? So I would just like you to expand a little on it probably and say, we also mentioned that when you were talking about the Kodava culture, that with inter-caste marriages, things are changing, right? The way social communities are constructed is changing.
Yes.
So what would be like, why are we trying to document ancient communities and how they were constructed, and how would it be relevant for future construction of communities?
I think that, yes, this is of course a very important point, but also really, really broad. Everything that we are now stands on everything that has happened in the past. And vast areas of this past of our cultural development have been left out of documented history. As I mentioned before that, even histories, when they are written with a certain perspective. Take, for instance, our histories in India, which are, written through a colonial perspective. To a large extent, a lot of the documentation that took place is from a colonial perspective. How do we begin to relook at those things? And it's vastly in English language. Where does the vernacular come in? Where does the local come in? Where are those histories that are connected entirely to oral traditions, which are like rituals, festivals, songs, ways of life that do not even feature, or maybe feature in very, very tiny ways. In order to look at our own contemporary society, it's really, really crucial to be able to understand all those elements, because otherwise it's like a jigsaw puzzle with many, many pieces missing. And what we are trying here is to, in whatever extent possible, we have already lost a lot, but in whatever extent possible, we're trying to grab onto those pieces and fit them in there. So they go together. Documented histories go together with the oral histories. As I mentioned earlier, sometimes they challenge the documented histories because the perspectives may be entirely different from the dominant perspective. But these are the things that we negotiate with, and that's why it's so important right now for us to be able to understand. As we're stepping forward into a complex virtual world with AI that is changing things even as we speak. To know our roots is something that is so crucial, and that's how I would answer your question.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, sure. Ms. Ridhima, please, do be in touch with us. Yeah, and definitely it's possible to at least link you to projects which are near to you as well. Like, for instance, the Living Waters Museum and the amount of work that they're doing in the community with history and mythology. I think that might be something interesting for you. Are the families that contributed to the research still in touch with you? Yes, absolutely, very much so. And we have a couple of people who are, here with us today. And it has been a very beautiful experience. They have introduced others to us, and we have been able to access more material because of many of them. In your experience, what have these research efforts, books, online museums, done for the communities and families that participated? So I would say, one, in a very, very practical way, for many of these families in the Goa Familia project who were worried about the situation of their albums, because the paper is frail, they are eaten sometimes by insects and termites. Sometimes they're affected by weather conditions and so on. We have been able to advise them as to a certain system of maintaining their archives. And secondly, because of digitizing all the material and handing it back to them, they now are keepers of a digital copy of all their original pictures that they share. which is a huge thing because many people don't have the mindset or the time or the access to go out and get everything scanned and keep them. So that's a very practical thing that we have been doing because we have a scanner and we are using that scanner and that recorder for all our documentation. It gives visibility and there is immense pride. I can say immense pride when the families come to the exhibitions themselves and see their pictures up on the wall and other people coming and viewing them, having dialogues about it. It is a matter of huge pride. For us, being Goa Familia, being part of a large showcase like Serendipity Art Festival is something beautiful because we have such a huge audience that is able to then interact with these interesting stories and histories. In terms of what the Sandooka project is doing, I think that joining hands with many others who have been documenting in this space and we are able to build a new archive of all these practices that are also disappearing, that are also, changing because customs are becoming truncated. Shorter time spans because families are not able to spend so many days together. So these are the things that we are able to, access, put together, and then offer them again as documentation for them to keep for their families and, future generations. So in that sense, there are quite a number of positive things that come out of it, like rare photographs and objects from collections in Kodagu also we have been able to document, share some of the digitized versions back with the families. So then, they also own digital copies that they can preserve in a different way than a physical object. So that I hope answers your question.
Does anyone else have any questions? So if not, Lina, actually, I had a question for you. So you collect these photographs and you document different families and communities, and they become a part of Goa Familia, and then you exhibit them as well. But I was wondering, what happens after that? Are people still able to access these documentations that you've done? And do you have an archive which is open, closed? How do people get access to this once you have already put it out there for exhibits?
So this is in progress because we mean to build an accessible archive for the public. But in the meantime, most of our larger stories and documentation have gone onto the website. So we work through this methodology. We put the larger stories onto the website. The smaller stories go onto the Instagram page and the Facebook page. And the larger number of the archived material, which of course is given back to the families, is then documented and kept aside in an archive, which as of now is not public. But we are hoping to develop enough of local support as well, because these sort of things require infrastructure. They require a certain amount of funds. They require sustained engagement, which is something that we are looking into very seriously. And if we can build a local partner to be able to share in these sort of things, then, we would be able to make the archive completely accessible to the public, which is what we would really like to do. But yeah, a few things need to be in place for that.
Yeah, thank you, Lina. So if there are no other questions, I'll draw the session to an end. Thank you, Lina, for such a wonderful session. I think we've all had so much to learn today and so much to look forward to as well. And everyone who's joined in, thank you for spending your Friday evening with us. We hope to see you for more such talks in the future. Thank you, everyone, and have a good evening.
Thank you so much for a really wonderful audience and participation. And thank you to Museum of Christian Art and Kunjan. Yes, a big thank you to everyone, and let's keep working the same way.